they're playing a little recording because I'm recording, but it will only be myself that's recorded because I'm spotlighted. And when you spotlight in this way, it's just the person being spotlighted that's being recorded, in case you were concerned about that. So, okay, so feet about hip width apart, and as always, nice and easy and gently as you get going. There are various ways in Tai Chi we can view the body, and each has their advantages and disadvantages. One way or another, we build up a picture, or if you prefer, a map of what's happening within the body, and this becomes more and more subtle, more and more detailed as our awareness of what is happening in the movements grows. One quite interesting view, one way of thinking about the posture is as you're thinking of your body as a series of platforms, of shelves, just building up through the body. And what we want to try and do oh, we've lost Brian. Excuse me, we've lost somebody. Let me just see. The platforms start with the ground that you're standing on, which is presumably fairly level. It doesn't look as though any of you are standing on a slope. And if you've ever built a shelf up from the ground, or built something, you know, if you build up a house of cards or something like that, each layer needs to sit on a flat or a level platform. So we imagine a series of platforms, a series of shelves through our body. So the first one is the ground, and then you can think of them in various places. You might think of the knees. So if your feet are level, chances are your knees are level. And then you come to your hips, and that's not quite so straightforward. You could be a bit sort of twisted over, and also front to back, it makes a difference, but you want that platform to be level. That's probably one of the key ones, really. And then you could imagine another platform here, say the solar plexus, and then your shoulders, and then your shoulders just support your head. Your head sits on that top platform. So you have this sort of sense of your body being in line and being level as much as possible. Now, it's a bit constructed, that, because as I've said before, there are no straight lines in your body, and very few people have the sort of posture where you could really guarantee that it was level in that way. So these ideas that we use are constructs. When we talk about, this line through the body or that line across the body or whatever, it's a bit like when you look at a map and you see the grid lines on the map, and those grid lines are actually quite useful for helping you to get around. If you're using the map to walk across a field, having the grid lines can help you orientate yourself. But if you go out in the field and start looking for the grid lines, they're not going to be there. And in the same way, a lot of the ideas, the images that we use to help us to align our body are just that. They're not the reality, but they still have a use. But it's important to realize that when we talk about the body being upright or a straight line through the body, it's not my body's completely straight. I imagine the line going down through my body. I imagine the line going across, and I very gently try to match my body to that. And it has to be a gentle process. You want to get a sense that this is the grid, if you like to think of it like that. And then within that grid, you have a shape that orientates itself with that grid. And then what you're going to do in your mind is your actual physical presence, your actual body is almost like plaster pouring into a mold. It flows into that. It isn't forced in or in any way. Don't be in a hurry to achieve this. Don't think that you're on some kind of time scale, because it's an ongoing process. And then just raising your arms a little. And let your hands drop. Rocking your weight forwards and backwards. So ordinarily, when we walk down the road or whatever, we don't have a completely flat surface. And really, it's about having this idea of something like what we're doing with this exercise, that we're moving forwards and backwards, and we're moving through the upright point. But it's a continual movement. And really, that's just life. You're constantly moving, adjusting. It's like riding a bike. If you get on a bike and you ride it, you never ride in a straight line for very long. You always sort of like move around. So we're moving around this central point, never getting too far from it. So this is an interesting exercise, and one of the reasons I like doing it, because, like, for instance, here I've got that line through the body, but I go forwards, and in going forwards, I move away from that line, but it's almost like, if I could show you, you can see this. If I imagine that going through my body, if I move away from it there, I want to feel like I'm a boat tied to a pole in the sea. I'm not staying still, but I eventually come back, and then I come to here, and then I get drawn back. What I don't want to do is to get to about here and lose it, if you see what I mean. But don't think that we're looking for some kind of really rigid stance here. It's not, because if you try and force yourself into a stance and force yourself to hold the posture, you won't be doing Tai Chi. That's not at all how Tai Chi works. Then your arms following. And of course, as soon as you bring your arms into the movement, there's a whole range of different factors. Your arms going forwards along the way can pull you forwards and so on. So the images and the ideas, this idea of the grid or the platforms, can only really get you so far. And what we're really trying to do is to train our intuition. If you ride a bike and somebody said to you, how are you managing to not fall off the bike? You would have to think about it, and you'd probably fall off the bike. But you had to go through a process of learning to stay on the bike, and then it just gets to be completely intuitive, quite hard to explain. What you can feel as you go forwards here, for instance, is almost like a thread of elastic from your heels up the back of your legs to your shoulders, from the tail of the spine to the top of your head. And then that thread of elastic contracts. And it's all, you kind of contract down a little bit, and you feel the same idea in the front of the body. So here, as you go forwards, The spine lengthens very slightly. And here it contracts. And that elasticity that we start to feel helps us to not go too far and means that when we go forward, we create the potential for the upward move, the backward movement. When we go back, we also create the potential for the forward movement. And then sinking down and pushing up. And here, once again, each movement we make carries the seed of the next movement. So as we sink down, we feel that springy quality in our legs, and eventually the springs push us up. We feel the pull of gravity increasing in strength as we go up, and then we get drawn down by it. And if we can recognize these forces acting on the body, we'll begin to recognize the point of change, where to simply continue going upright would mean that we have to start really straining. To continue to go down would mean that we're really kind of straining to go down. And of course, that straining has no place in Tai Chi. And then changing. And we can feel that change, and we can feel that loading of the body for the next movement in various ways. So for instance, as I push up and the arms go out here I feel an opening. My hips start to sink, and then to leave my hand there, now I'm straining. So it's there and there. And a lot of that is muscular. It's not entirely muscular, but of course, a muscle that gets extended, all it can do is contract after that. So we go as far as it's possible to go without creating a tightening in the body. And then changing. One more time. And change. So between the two sort of broad categories of movement, the extension, the contraction, the loading and the releasing, however you interpret it at any particular point, between yin and yang, we generate a movement, a rhythm, a flow. My first teacher, Bronwyn Hipkin, this was learning one of the Tai Chi forms, used to constantly say to us, virtually every class, the seed of the next movement is in the movement that you're doing. So your best chance of getting the next movement correct is to really focus your attention on the movement that you're doing and get it as correct as possible. And that leads us straight into this meditational element of just focusing into the moment. One more time. And then changing. So one of the things that we have a tendency to do is to cut corners. And what I sometimes see people doing with this exercise is that they'll push out nice and slowly, and they'll start to come in, and then they'll either speed up, or sometimes they'll get halfway and then they'll try and start the next movement. So give yourself time and space to really let your hands come right back to the starting position here. And we discover that there's a slight, I was going to say pause. Pause is overstating it. There's a little bit of a space between the extension and the contraction, between yin and yang. A bit like if you throw a ball up in the air, it seems to hang there for a moment before it comes down. Or if you watch two people on a seesaw, that bit in the middle, they can sometimes just sort of like be in that perfectly poised position just for a split second. One more round of this one. So between the focusing of our attention and the recognition of that sort of pivot point, that point sort of like, well, everything seems to just settle down for a moment, we start to get this sense of stillness within the movement. And this is something very special, I think, about Tai Chi. But although it's a very dynamic art, there is also this lovely sense of quietness and stillness within it. And then so many things in Tai Chi harmonize: movement and stillness, loading, releasing, extension, contraction, cease to be opposites that work against each other. They actually become things that work in harmony and enhance each other. If it's comfortable, add in the turn. And then switch sides. Add the turn. Now rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. One more time. Transferring your weight from side to side. We sometimes talk about this middle part of the body, sometimes referred to as the lower dantian, as being like the hub of a wheel. And again, this idea of a stillness within the movement. You know, when a wheel spins round, it needs something that is still to encourage the movement. So once again, we find that what appears to be contradictory actually very much complement each other. So we can begin to learn to focus our attention into that middle part of our body. And into bear play. It's quite possible, I think, quite plausible to think that we have a direct effect on the nervous system when we focus our attention, so that the pathway, if you like, that our awareness travels down to reach the center of our body becomes more useful. So that quality of stillness becomes more accessible. Then we're going to change to hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Turn out and out. Another useful thing about focusing our attention into the lower dantian is that it's that part of the body that we want to feel is dropping to the ground. So we get to a point where it's as though there's a constant monitoring. It's not something you consciously think about eventually. But it means that the return to being rooted becomes as automatic as, I don't know, brushing your hair out your eyes or something like that. One more time. Then bring the weight to the middle. Bring your hands to the front. Mirror my movements. Turn your left hand palm up and push your hands away from each other so you're pressing up towards the ceiling and down to the floor, stretching between heaven and earth. And it's slightly diagonal. And then bringing your hands back together. They almost touch each other, but they slide past. And do this on the other side. You can do it with a little bit of a sinking down as the hands come to the middle, and then pushing up. So this is stretching between heaven and earth, and those who've done it with me before, you'll be aware that there are a number of stages, each one a little bit trickier than the previous one. So as we go through those stages, just stop where you feel comfortable. So this time, move your weight across in the direction of the hand that's pushing upwards. Come back to the middle and move across. Try not to sort of tilt over or anything. It's quite a tricky movement. And then you can start to move the feet as well. So next time you go over into your left, especially as you push up, just let the left heel come up. And then, of course, the right heel. And then next stage is to actually move the leg in. So you step in, bring the foot right in next to the one resting on the ground, step across. And then eventually if you're comfortable with this, raising the foot, so you bring the foot in, basically draw the knee up. Last time. Okay. Stretching your feet up and just tilting your body. And again, we feel here, there's the extension, there's the contraction. If you stretch out an elastic band, then it will contract and that pulls you back the other way. So once you've started moving, it just maintains itself. Try not to just sort of like let your head flop over. When you're in this position, imagine a curve, a very smooth, even curve, very shallow curve, all the way through the body. And not this, or this, or this, or whatever. Remember, the strength of a curve is related to the actual degree of curvature. And the idea is not to put yourself under any kind of pressure. Think about a branch of something like willow, a very flexible wood. You could bend it a little way and it would be fine, but bend it too far and it'll snap. Or if there's a kind of bend, if there's already a kink in it and you do that, it'll probably give it the kink and so on and so forth. So this straight line that we imagine down through the middle of the body is just very gently curved by this movement. Hands in front of you. I'm going to go into swimming dragon, and as always, if you prefer to keep your feet wide apart, if that's more comfortable for you, that's fine. Rather start, just be very careful. I'm going to move my feet together and then dropping down, coming underneath and across. Very, very careful. It's a lovely movement on our back, but very strong on the back. Always remember with any of these exercises, when it said, yeah, this is a really good movement for X, Y, or Z, that means that it's working there. So, it may be a good thing for you to do to, I don't know, release your back or your neck or whatever it is the exercise is supposed to be for. But it's really important that you get the exercise correct. Particularly if you've got a stiff back and you think, oh, it's good for the back, I'll do this. Take a lot of care, because if your back is stiff, you don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to do the movement too big. And always remember, the movements flow. And if it's not flowing, then you need to moderate the movement a little bit as well. Change direction. Okay, shake out. Now, 1 foot forwards, transferring the weight. One of the tricky things that we have to do is to take a stance. So, at the beginning I was talking about being parallel on the platforms and bring it into movement. And it's one thing to feel these alignments in our body when we're not moving. It's quite another to maintain them while we're moving. It's a bit like if you get on a bus or a train and there's no seats, so I'll stand. You know, oh, I'm okay. I'll stand there. I don't need to hold on to anything. And then it starts up, and suddenly you're, oops, maybe I do. As soon as you introduce movement, as soon as you introduce change, then things start to go wrong if you're not careful. And the training in Tai Chi, you bring your attention back to the center, you let your center drop. That's always going to be the first thing that we look to. And we must move from the ground. If you don't quite get that last statement, imagine what it would be like to try and do these movements on a pair of roller skates or ice. If you had no traction with the ground, how easy would this movement be? It'd be quite difficult, because as soon as you push down, your foot would run away. So the contact with the ground and the use of the ground is crucial. Raising your toes and your heel. And I emphasize that because actually it's really important that we take that on board, because everybody, when they start doing Tai Chi, and even when they've been doing Tai Chi for a long time, gravitates towards moving the arms first. That's true for Tai Chi, it's true for other martial arts as well. One of the most common phrases I hear martial arts teachers say is, feet, remember what your feet are supposed to do. Get the feet right, and you stand a good chance of getting the rest of it right. And then stepping in. And shake out. If you think about it, that idea of moving from the ground is simply good mechanics. Let me show you something. So I'm going to get a pile of books, and I put them on the floor, and I think, well, they're in the way there, so I'll move them. And what I do is I'll move them with my foot. I put my foot on the bottom book, and I push it along, and the whole pile moves. If I get it wrong and I think, well, I'll move the books and I push on the top book, oh, everything falls apart. It's simple mechanics. If the top moves first without the support of the bottom in one way or another, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, particularly when I shuffle books, then you're setting yourself up for some kind of problem mechanically. If you get the problem mechanically, sooner or later you will experience the same problem with the flow, because we can't separate the flow and the mechanics. So the other foot forwards, it makes this a really vital exercise. Somebody told me about somebody they knew who was in China. It was a Western guy, but trained in China for many years, 10, 12 years, something like that. And when they were coming back to this country, they turned around to their teacher and they said, they were training in Tai Chi and Kung Fu and stuff. They said, you taught me all this stuff. What am I supposed to do next? Because I'm now going back. I probably won't see you for years and I'll forget it. And apparently the guy just looked at him and said, oh, just do this exercise, you'll be fine. Yeah. and then raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. Problem is, our feet are a long way from our brain, so they're very easy to forget about. And then stepping through. Okay, first foot forwards. Pigeon spreads its wings. So this is where it gets tricky, because we're thinking about the arms, but we can't lose touch with the feet. And this is where the meditation aspect, that aspect of training our attention, is something that runs parallel to the physical training. Well, say runs parallel. To be honest, I don't think I could separate out the physical from the meditation. One more time. Fisherman casting net. Pushing a wave. And then wind blows the willows, sitting back, turning towards your front foot. Forward, settle into the front foot, turn the opposite way. Take your time. Remember that at the point of change from one stage of a movement to another, there's that little kind of pivot point, shall we call it. Make sure you find that. So don't just flap your arms around, settle into the back foot, turn in the center of your body, the source of the still, the home of the seat, or whatever, of the stillness, and let your arms follow. And then if you're comfortable with that, step in. So the temptation when you get confused in an exercise, or not sure what to do, is to speed up, to strain, to rush at it, which is really an adrenaline reaction. Tai Chi is an art of problem solving, takes the exact opposite view. We look for that stillness, that quietness. And that's quite a difficult mental shift. And shake out. Now, if you felt that you were trying to do more than one thing at the same time, then that you somehow had to coordinate, say, hands and feet, then you weren't focusing in the center of your body. If I get a bicycle wheel and I move the hub, I move all the spokes at the same time. In fact, when I get on my bike and I start to pedal, I don't think, well, I've got to coordinate that spoke with that spoke with that spoke with that spoke. I just turn the pedals. In other words, I use the center of the movement, and that connects to all points. So if you think about it, I'm going to exaggerate slightly. I go forwards and I turn, and you can see my arms moving, and that turn starts to lift. Look, starts to lift my heel. One movement, which is the movement in the center of the body. That will guide you through all of the movements. Okay, on the other side. Pigeon spreads its wings. And then changing. And change. and change. And then stepping in. Okay. Shake out. Good. Rub your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. One shoulder. Your arm. The other side. And your back. Around your hips. Nice and light on your belly. The upper part of your chest. So in Embrace Tiger, Return to the Mountain, we get that sense of coming back to something. It's inevitable that as we extend out, our arms go out, or whatever we're doing, any kind of expansion, any kind of thing that takes us away from the center, will eventually have some kind of limit. So there's always that kind of, and you start to come back. The important thing is the coming back. I can't remember if I said to this group recently, but there was a lovely story of Titi Liang, who was a well-known teacher from America, and he somebody must have said to him how he always looked in perfect balance, standing on one leg and all that kind of thing, and he obviously denied this and said that he lost balance all the time, but he got it back all the time. And this seems to me to be the essential quality that when we're thinking about these things, stillness, of calmness, of being centered, and something like that. It's unrealistic to expect us to be there all the time. Life doesn't allow that. But what we can do is find that way back. And of course, we have this idea of a physical location, this part of the body, and from here down into the ground, so that mentally we have a pathway back. So just sinking down, embracing tiger, return to the mountain. One more round. And stand. Shake out. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, if you have